You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 281. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, author of How to Get On Podcasts, the podcast matchmaker, and CEO and founder of the MLG Collective. I'm excited to share the stories and life lessons of changemakers and authors with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and today we're talking about some feelings. I've got Dr. Jessi Gold, author of How Do You Feel? She is a psychiatrist, she is an academic, she's a professor, she's also an expert on pop culture and a whole lot of fun. We are talking about her memoir, but we're also talking about the stigma around mental health. We're talking about what it's like to be two empaths who feel a whole lot of things and what her job is like and so much more. I loved reading How Do You Feel? And I reached out to her, as you were about to hear, throughout the book to tell her what I was really loving. I cried in the book. It was a terrific read. So get ready for a very entertaining conversation with Dr. Jessi Gold. Hello, Dr. Gold.
Hello.
Oh, Jessi, I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited too.
Can you take a moment to introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Sure. I'll give you like the nerdy introduction and then I'll throw in some fun stuff too so people don't think I just went to school my whole life. So
well-rounded, I like it.
So I'm the Chief Wellness Officer for the University of Tennessee System, which is all 5 schools of the University of Tennessee, including the ones you probably see in school, like on TV for sports, and then also the Health Science Center. I'm an associate professor of psychiatry at the Health Science Center, which is based in Memphis, Tennessee. And I see primarily faculty, staff, and students. So also a lot of those faculty and staff are obviously healthcare workers. I went to a bunch of fancy schools to get all my degrees, but importantly studied anthropology and have a master's in anthropology too. I like to say that because I think a lot of people who go into medicine have a pretty like biology, chemistry, medicine path, and anthropology is pretty central to how I think about things. And then I'm the youngest of 4. I have a dog. Her name is Winnie. I watch a lot of really dumb television. I used to write for fun and now I write for part of my job. We have a book that came out, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which is called How Do You Feel? But otherwise, I did start writing as like a coping mechanism in med school, really. And then recognized that it also was a pretty powerful way to educate around these issues, and then started doing a lot of freelancing and then ended up kind of where I am with the book.
I love the book. I read it over my holiday break and I felt like I know you even better. And there were so many times where I was like, you and I are so much the same.
That's the goal, I think. I think, in not telling like every single thing that's traumatic that's ever happening to me, but also like making it pretty commonplace of the things that we deal with at work, like burnout, for example, or, really talking with my real voice in the way that I write. I wanted people to see themselves in different parts of it instead of being like, that's a really powerful story, but it's like not me, which I think happens a lot with memoir, not for any bad reason, but that tends to be the memoirs that get out there versus like sort of, oh, I resonate with that, or I resonate with that, and that happened to me too, or I kind of am just a conduit to be a voice for your problems and your struggles too.
Which is funny that you bring up memoir because honestly, reading it, I didn't look at it as, oh, this is a memoir of a part of your life. And obviously it is because, and we'll share a bit about what the book is about, but you discuss how through COVID, you were all by yourself. You're working remotely from home. Your job is to see healthcare professionals, to listen to them and what they're going through while you're doing all of these presentations on burnout, while you are yourself getting burnt out and not even recognizing it, despite that's being all you're talking about. And so, yes, it is a memoir per se, but it doesn't come across, or it didn't, at least to me, come across as a memoir, because we get to also know your patients who, again, I was messaging you like, oh, I want to know what happens to them, and are they okay, and how do they get through?
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of fun, maybe it's its own genre, to be honest. Like, I think they market it as a memoir because they have to pick something, like they're like, I guess it's mostly memoir, but I've always kind of described it as like part memoir, part patient narrative, part research, because like I put citations in it. I don't think everybody who writes like self-help books or, other sort of mental healthy books is really like going deep in their research and putting a ton of citations. But for me, I'm a doctor. Like, I was trained as a research background. I've done research on this stuff. So to me, I really wanted to make sure that some of that got in there too in an accessible way. So I tried to weave like all those things together in a kind of weird style, I suppose, which is like a little bit different than just being a memoir. But yeah, I liked being able to talk about my patients a lot. I actually have not done that a lot either. Like, in a lot of the writing I've done before, I would maybe do like an intro paragraph and an end paragraph that mentioned something about a patient encounter or a situation to sort of ground it in story, because I'm a big fan of story. But I've never done like character development and writing a full narrative and writing dialogue and stuff. So I had to learn a lot to do that. But I also think it makes it more tangible and more powerful than if I gave you those research studies on their own, for sure.
Definitely, because you feel connected to these people just as you do characters in a novel of, okay, what are they going through? They're coming to you with their problems. And there were parts where I was like, yes, I get it. Like, oh my goodness. And I loved getting to know you in the book too, as, their therapist of, oh, well, this is what I went through, and that you share this with them, but then we get to meet your therapist too and see how you
Yes.
are as the patient or client. And I thoroughly enjoyed it because I felt like we got to know all of these different people, but you especially.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, in like a meta way, I had to talk to my therapist about including her. And, obviously I changed her name for lots of reasons, because primarily I don't really want people to go to her because they read a book and she was in it, but also to protect her privacy. But, when you're going to write a book about your therapist who's still your therapist and you happen to know about all the layers of stuff because you were trained in it, I mean, we had a lot of conversations about it. And, she said to me, like, I didn't really ever want to be in a book. I'm not ever writing one myself, but it seems really incongruent with you and inauthentic for your story to ignore that part, to pretend that somehow you were burnt out and you managed it with self-care and that therapy wasn't a big part of what really helped you and continues to help you. And I'm, I see myself as like part of that, as opposed to, just this extra thing that you put in for fluff, but it also normalizes it for people in a way that, she said she was fine with. And I wanted through that too.
And you bring up such a big topic that many people don't realize or recognize in the healthcare industry of how utterly hard it is to be a healthcare professional, whether during a pandemic or otherwise, starting from med school.
Yeah, and the not recognizing it thing is our fault, like the people who do the work, in a lot of ways, because we don't talk about it and we're trained not to talk about it. And so if we don't tell you our job is hard, you just think we must have some kind of amazing coping skills to deal with what we see, or somehow they teach us magical skills to deal with the things that we're doing on a daily basis. And I don't blame patients for not recognizing that, because really, like, we don't recognize it in ourselves. And I wouldn't expect you to be thinking too much about my mental health or what that was like for me, unless, like, it's in your face. I think COVID, for example, put it in everybody's face, because healthcare workers were on TV talking about their experiences and like couldn't hide their emotions and like couldn't hide what they were seeing. And it was much more obvious that like they were going to work when you weren't, and things that just like kind of highlighted these sort of clear cut differences in our job and our sort of mission to serve. And I think that's part of why I said it in COVID too, besides it being the time that all of this happened for me, was like, I do think it sort of said like, this is a topic that has been here, will be here, will continue to be different reasons for being here. But like this threw it into people's faces in a very different way, including our own.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as someone who works in administrative work around wellness, who kind of got called to do more of that during this time period, you can see how many organizations like flexed their services, tried to target that and didn't have as much as they should have before, and had to sort of catch up and do it during. But it was much more acknowledged, even in coworkers or in the healthcare system, that this was like a thing during this time, as opposed to what we're trained to talk about and believe, and what we mostly deal with, which is like, oh yeah, like we're fine.
Yeah. And then as someone who's listening to other people's problems, like this is all you do. You're like, okay, tell me all of your issues, your problems, what you're going through. And you're absorbing this on a daily basis. So I'm so glad that you had your doctor to go to so she could absorb some of it. And she has a doctor to go to.
Yeah,
It's
she
that
calls
trickle
it like a
effect.
train. Like,
Yes.
someone has some, I don't know that there's a master someone
I
where it
was just
ends,
thinking of
but
that in my head. I'm thinking of, with a therapist, like who's at the top of this and who do they speak to?
maybe it circles
God? No.
back or something. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, I had seen therapists before, so having a therapist help me wasn't new, but having this kind of relationship with one was, and needed so badly in this context. But a lot of times when you do a job like mine, like you kind of go, well, I'm not doing long hours like a surgeon. I am not doing medicine where I'm cutting people or touching people. I'm just listening, and it should be fine. Like we don't have like when people think about psychiatry, even like therapy in general, I don't know that people are always like, well, that's like a really hard like job. But I think when you stop and think about it, it makes sense that it is,
Yeah.
because you're like, for me and for so many people, we go into it because we care, like it's a core value of mine to serve others, but also I'm an empath. And if you care, it's impossible to not hear what people are saying to you. Like you can be there, participate, and kind of remove yourself in some capacity, but you can't do it all day, every day, with no relief. And you can't do it in the context of your own struggles, which is something I've learned over time, that like the more I have going on with me, the harder it is to put up like whatever sort of trained facade I'm able to do to protect myself. There's a time where my previous dog got sick and was like in the doggy ER or like in ICU, and I was seeing patients and like a patient said something to me and then left the room, and then I started crying like uncontrollably, and I was like, the world is a dark place, and I kept saying like to myself, and like my friend came in, she's like, what's going on, who's also a psychiatrist, and I was like, the world's bad. And she was like, I mean, yes, Jessi, like the world has been bad and you listen to the bad stuff in the world. And I was like, something's wrong because I can't tune it out. And I think it's like somehow that like whatever defense I've earned from doing this over time, and watching other people do it and seeing what they do when there's anything going on with me that like slowly cracks or turns down the volume and the other volume goes way, way up. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like all of a sudden, oh yeah, like I listen to really bad stuff, and it sometimes takes like times like that to remind me that there's no way my job's not emotionally challenging, and to pretend that it like somehow magically I'm not going to be affected by it, which I think is how most of us are told, like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And I know something that we also went back and forth on was how we tend to check on those that we are working with. Your doctor, my therapist. I'm like, are you okay? Can I check in with you too? And that I know that's something that most people don't, but as
Yeah.
empaths,
So I didn't even know it wasn't. My therapist went through like a family member dying pretty early on in our relationship. And when she mentioned that she was going to have to take time off and had this going on, she told me I was one of the people she was most concerned to tell. And I, defensively was like, what's wrong with me? Like my mental health isn't that bad. Like, cause to me, I heard like, oh no, you're going to crack if I tell you, or you're going to be concerned I'm gone, or you're going to get worse, whatever. And she said, oh no, it's not that. It's just that you can't forget that I told you that. And you like will ask about me and not be able to focus on you. And this is going to be a thing for us for a while. And you know, it was. I mean, I appreciated that she said that because I don't think I really knew that about myself, but I also didn't know it was different. I was like, I don't understand that. Like, wouldn't that be hard for everyone? And she's like, I mean, sort like people will say like, I'm sorry to hear that, etc., and they'll go right back to their own stuff. She's like, you just can't. And even like kind of, you know, I don't think she'd care about me sharing. Like she was around a bit longer, like because of the family members sort of being on hospice and stuff like that. And every day I'd be like, I'd do my session, and at the end I'd be like, do you mind me asking how you're doing? And like one time she was like, you know, you're the only one who's still asking me that. She's like, is there something else that you want to know? And I was like, well, I just feel like it's been a while and I was just worried. And she was like, you know, she told me kind of honestly how it had been and said, did that make you feel better that I gave you more details? And I was like, I guess so. And I was like, are you concerned that you told me all those details? And she said, I just worry that you'll then not think I'm like, you'll think I shouldn't be working, you know? And I said, well, I kind of do respect you as a provider, that you wouldn't show up if you couldn't do that. So don't worry about that part. But I'm still like, as a human, gonna be this person because I don't know how not to be. And I think it brought us closer in a lot of ways to have a bit more of an in-depth conversation like that. But it also like really did, like therapy does in so many ways, call attention to stuff you don't know is different from other people, or it calls attention to things like in the way you interact with others that maybe you didn't understand. And I didn't know like checking in on a person whose family member was dying regularly would be something that doesn't happen very often, you know?
It shows you care. And, you know, unfortunately, I think we live during a time where there's not as much caring for others as there could or should be.
Yeah.
But to me, that shows that you care. So I say good on you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you do that too. I mean, I think in so many ways it's I envy people who can walk in a room, say this is my 1 hour for me, and actually feel like that. Like I really do wish I could do that, because it maybe even would make therapy easier and work better for me if I could do that. But it you know, as much as I can learn that like others impact my emotional well-being in such a way that I have to learn to deal with that, and like that can be modeled even with stuff she's going through, right? Like that can be part of the experience. But it's just so not me to be able to be like, this time is just for me and I don't care about you, right? Like even if like right now there was something going on globally in the world that I know every one of my patients is talking about, and I know that it's really hard for me, like I will also do the same and say, is every one of your patients bringing this up? Like, I'm sorry to also bring this up, right? You know, because it's like, I'm just very aware, you know, for better or worse.
And I do the same thing with friends who are therapists. I'm like, has anyone checked on you? Because I know what everyone else is going through, and I know what I'm going through. So you're listening to it all. So are you okay too? And has anyone asked you that?
What do they say?
No, I have one friend in particular. Yeah, she's like, oh, well, thank you for asking that. No, you know, and we have those conversations, but you know, I think that there's so many people who don't, whether we're talking about therapy or like driving, and they're like, well, I'm going to run the red light because I have to get where I got to go, and it doesn't matter. I tell my kids all the time, in my next life, I'm coming back as someone who's selfish and doesn't care what anybody else is doing.
Just to see what it's like.
Yeah. I would love to know what that's like to live guilt-free, rent-free, you know, just whatever. I'm going to do what I want when I want, no matter what. But that's not who I am.
Yeah, I think it would, I don't know that I'd be as successful as I am, but you know, I do think, and it's part of sort of the moral of a lot of the book for me, is like the things that make me who I am that probably people tried to shut down because they didn't fit their mold of what medicine should be or whatever, is probably what makes me most successful. But I just didn't know that when I was younger. Like I really wanted to be what they told me to be, because it felt like, you got here, you earned it. If you want to survive in this competition, you better figure out how to become that robot in the same outfit everyone else is wearing and not look any different, act any different, talk any differently. Like I just had on my mind, like when people would give you feedback that was like basically about my personality, like I'd take it to heart and go, I guess I have to change. And not in a way where, like, if you fought with a friend and you were kind of trying to figure out something a friend said where you would automatically believe that person was right, but it was so strong because of how much of the culture is so hierarchical and how much of our success is so dependent on other people's opinions and the next step that we're going on, and how much people sort of like don't hear you when you say, are you sure? like, but it's taken me a while to sort of land on like, oh, like that's actually good about me. And so when I think about what you said about kind of coming back as a selfish person, like I think the fun of it would be like able like to go through life and not have to feel so much. But I don't know that I would get to be doing something I cared about so much. I don't think that I would get to be doing it at the level that I'm doing it at. I don't think I'd have to have as much of an impact. But I suppose I may have different values at that point, and maybe those things wouldn't matter, right? Like I think like my values are like, can I get to these places and like do these things that are really helping? If I'm selfish, then it really just depends on how you get there for you.
Yeah. And I think that morally, neither of us could actually work that way. So
It'd be
it's just,
nice.
it's my joke. I wish it's not going to happen.
I mostly wish like some days I could just not feel as much.
Yeah.
Like, and I know that sounds like kind of bonkers too, because like I deal in feelings, but also like I'm not great at like naming my own feelings and really living in like the clearest sense of the word of like how I would want patients to live with their emotions. Like I don't want to not feel in a way where I'm just pushing it down and it's going to come up. I just mean it would be nice sometimes to just not be affected at
Yeah.
all.
Oh, I totally get that. I totally get that. But I loved also that you share in the book, we get to go on this journey with you where you're like, should I share this with my patients? Should I not tell them that I've been through this too, or this is what it was like for me? And as you reveal more and more, we see the changes in them, and they're epic changes. The one who cries, oh, oh, you guys got to read the book to know what I'm talking about. But the woman didn't cry for like a decade.
Yeah.
And then the older woman who comes and she takes her hand, and I cried. I totally cried.
Yeah, I mean, we're taught, and probably people listening haven't had a lot of doctors who do that, right? Like, or therapists who have said, like, here's something I dealt with too. We're taught not to. Like, as doctors, for sure. In med school, it's selfish. In med school, it makes it about you. In med school, it makes like it's distracting. In med school, it is something someone else can beat you on. Like vulnerability loses in competition. And so it's discouraged. And then mental health, it's like, thanks to this guy named Freud, is like, I am a person, but I reflect this like mirror, and I'm just here to help you figure out you, and my background doesn't matter. And there are definitely people who believe that in mental health. Like psychoanalysts would be like the furthest kind of group of folks that kind of have that in their mind. But I think it has changed some over time in mental health as so many people go into it with lived experience, and patients like that more. It has become easier to share. But you're not trained. It's not like a skill that's trained. And I think it should be in so many ways, because like I've seen it. I don't think it should be used all the time. Like I don't think with every patient it makes sense for me to talk about myself. I don't think in every circumstance it does. And some people need more boundaries than in other people because they haven't had them in their lives. So you being the person who's like, blah, 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 here's me, we're friends now, it doesn't help them. But also doesn't help if like, I mentioned something and I was like, oh, me too. Like it just like it has to have a purpose, I think, and it's more purposeful. And that's why I do think it's a skill in that setting. Like obviously people can Google me, they can read the book, they can figure it out externally, and that's different. But like one-on-one in my office, what I'm choosing to share and how I choose to share it feels like it should have been a skill I was taught. I feel like I was taught it more from my therapist than anybody else, because she's very good about when she chooses to use it. We're not friends. We would never be friends. There's so many reasons that's weird, but like I don't actually feel like we're friends, but I feel like I know her well, because I feel like she does share when it makes sense, and like does tell me when things like would point things out in me by her sharing it. And I saw from her like kind of how much that impacted me, and was like, oh, like I could do that. Like I see so many people that are like me. I chose to do the specialties that I see for a reason. Like, I'm not seeing, when we train, we do inpatient psych, we do a lot more community psych, and like those patients are very different, and their experience is very different than mine. Like choosing to see college students or choosing to see healthcare workers is like, I chose to see people based on the times when I most needed help and the people I see every day that I don't think are dealing with their stuff. Right. And so choosing to do that, I should recognize that having so many similarities would make a self-disclosure more powerful, right? Like would make it easier than just like pretending that we don't have the same experience, or that I didn't struggle with the same stuff. Especially some of the younger folks who are also like looking up at you as like in a hierarchical way, like she's made it in medicine and what's that like. And so not only am I their psychiatrist, I'm also this person in like academics that they look up to for that way. And so if you can say like, hey, like I stink at tests too, like they're actually miserable, or I literally went to school for emotions and I don't know what I'm feeling and when I'm feeling it because I turned it off too, right? Like these things that maybe we just should say out loud more and don't, I think are really powerful, like little self-disclosures, even in friend groups and even in like colleagues and even in like your school with them. Like the thing that I think would most change like these groups to be safer and more of a culture of caring is honestly like doing that more, not in a therapeutic session, like saying some of the quiet stuff out loud, being like, isn't it super weird that I trained in feelings and I don't know my feelings? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like it makes you like, it just makes you less alone. And then if you feel less alone, you're more likely to share yourself. And then it makes it like kind of in that same way that a therapist has a therapist has a therapist, it like slowly cracks the surface of this like facade of fine.
Yeah. We don't talk enough, like period. We all know that. And then I think that we don't have enough people now. It's like, I'm going to say quote unquote cool, to have a therapist. Like people are now talking about it openly, when less than a decade ago it was like, whoa, you see someone, you talk to someone, yowzers. I mean, that's how I was raised. It was like, what's wrong
Yeah.
with you if you're going to go there? So
I feel like I would say people might be surprised how slow that has moved in healthcare workers. Like healthcare workers still don't really talk about therapists. So even when I talk about like having a therapist, you can kind of see them be like, really? It's really encouraged in psychiatry training because of what we do. The mental health professionals across the board are pretty encouraged as part of training to do these, like to go to therapy, even just to understand yourself, to understand your patient better. But other specialties less so. It feels more like, oh, you should go there, get away from us because we don't want to deal with your issues. And so it becomes like a more extreme measure in healthcare still. And then across the board in sort of culture, I would say psychiatry hasn't become cool. Like
right.
most people aren't like, my med that I take every day, it is really important to my needs. It's like a lot easier to say that you just talk to someone. All I needed was
Yeah.
somebody to talk to figure this out. Like, and that's not true for a lot of us. Like I take meds. And I recognize that I thought of it differently, even though I prescribe meds to people every day. And I think that's, again, a product of what I was trained in, what magazines I read as a kid, what TV shows, what people around me, my family talked about, just like anyone else. Even though I believe what I say to patients, how it gets in and what it means about me is different. And I think so many people hesitate to even talk to a psychiatrist, hesitate to start medication because of that. Like, what does it mean about me? Like, I'm this sick that I need a medicine, because also, unfortunately, in our culture, like it's a sick-based healthcare. It's not
Right.
preventative in so many ways. So it's like we don't go to doctors unless we absolutely need them. And so mental health is the same way. Like I don't have to go to a psychiatrist until like I'm really bad and I really need it and it's a last resort. And that makes it feel like a bigger decision than it is to say like I tried therapy, it didn't work, or I've got my problems are more severe, I need more help, or this is genetic and it's just not going to be solved with talking alone,
Mm-hmm.
or this is a more severe mental illness like bipolar, this needs medication, like whatever it is. Like it just those barriers to even those simple sort of like realizations are pretty high still, I think. I don't know what you think when you're like reading stuff or talking to people. I talk to more psychiatrists so I maybe, but like, you know.
No, we have it. It's close to home. There's mental illness, and I do know more. I've been more involved than maybe the average person per se. So I recognize that there's that stigma, and so we don't talk about it. And I think there's also for me, I'm like, well, it's not me personally, so I'm not going to put it out there,
Yep.
for that person. But I encourage that person, you should talk about it. You should absolutely talk about it. And if you want me to talk about it, I'll talk about it too. We can talk together. But to release that stigma of this is what's going on. And I think that with the way that our world is, and I'm not talking just politically, I'm talking, there is so much nonsense that is going on there. I mean, as we're talking, we've got half the states on fire. We have thousands of people who are now homeless, in addition to the regular homelessness that we have. We've got drug epidemics, we've got wars going on. We have all of these things going on. Mental health is not going to get better, my friends.
Yeah.
Like these are not, I don't want to say they're not happy times because we have happy moments, but it's so overwhelming. And with social media and the internet, and now things aren't regulated and there's no fact checking, it's only going to get worse. Before it gets better, I fear for the mental health of people. And so if we are going to continue stigmatizing this as something bad, then we're really shit out of luck.
Yeah, we're just not helping people have the tools to survive, right?
Mm-mm.
Like, I say sometimes, like, yeah, you might hate your job and want to leave, but you can't because of privilege of what that means. And so you might have to tolerate a job that's hard. And to tolerate it, it might affect your mental health. Or you might have no control over something like COVID or a fire or whatever, but you see it everywhere in the news. You see videos, you see posts, you have family, you're worried. Like, you can't control any of that, but it's going to impact your mental health. But if you don't deal with it or you worry about it like you can control it, it will impact you. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there was a time in the pandemic when we were going into an election season and also some other stuff going on in the world where I just was like, oh, this doesn't get better, does it? And I think like so much of the way I had framed dealing with the pandemic for me was like, oh yeah, like, and this is all the healthcare workers I talked to too, like 2 more months, 3 more months. Like I just need to get through this. And a lot of folks I think did that to survive at home too, like parenting at home, schooling at home, whatever.
Kindergarten on
Yeah.
Zoom. It was
And so
good.
it's got to be great. And I think I did that thinking like, oh, it like on the other side, like it'll be better, even though I knew like in my head that it wasn't really better before. I knew all the data too, right? But once it was like this time where the election was coming and I could see kind of both sides of the polarization and then I could see everything else that was coming, I was like, oh gosh, like this doesn't get better, does it? And my therapist said something kind of like, was it ever better? Like, name a time that it was better. And it helped me again to sort of go like, we have these like beliefs that the worst is what we're experiencing, and there was probably some bad before, and there will be bad after. But I do think like our jobs in particular need to have sustainability to them because you need to know that like when you struggle we exist, and if we don't actually deal with our own stuff, we pretend our jobs don't affect us until they do. We're not having work-life balance enough, we're not getting compensated well enough, whatever it is that's kicking people out of various professions. Like if you need a nurse, you won't have one. If you need a psychiatrist or a therapist, you won't have one. If you need a doctor who specializes in something in particular, you won't have it, and I think that to me is also such a concern, which is like the reason to care as a person who sits at home about what my mental health is that your mental health is bad and you need somebody to help you with it. And if I can't, because I can't deal with my own stuff, or I haven't, you're, for lack of a better phrase, shit out of luck, right? Like, I mean, it's just like, I don't know what else
or the title of the episode.
Like, it's a bad thing to say, I suppose, but it's just like, that's where my brain went, is sort of like, that's what happens in these situations. Like, there is no train, right? Like, we talked about therapists help therapists, like that doesn't exist if we don't help ourselves, and there's no helping patients in that situation. And if you sit at home and you go like, gosh, the world is pretty miserable, I could see this impacting me at some point, like, you should worry about you, and you should worry about how to get help. But you should also recognize, if you're worried about that you need to think about the fact that, like, we need sustainability in our jobs too to be able to help you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I feel like we could just keep going on and on.
Sometimes I'm like, gosh, I'm such a good Debbie Downer.
No, we're laughing and smiling the whole way. We're like, y'all are shit out of luck.
Yeah. Sometimes I give talks, I'm like, here's where we were before, bad. Here's where we are now, worse. Yay. You know, I give skills and stuff, but like, I pause and I go, now that I've just made everybody in this room very depressed, yay, I'll try to give you some solutions. But it's like, you know, when you present the information, sometimes it comes a little bit like, wah, like, but it's true. Like, I don't want to sugarcoat things. I don't think it helps people. I'm a big fan of like radical honesty as much as possible. Like, I don't think it helps to be like, oh, of course you're fine from all the stuff you're reading on the news. You're not fine. Like, you're not fine. And if you need a break and you recognize that you're not fine, that's also cool. Like, take a break. You know, almost every time something happens in the news, I feel compelled to, because I don't see it posted. It's posted right now on my Insta stories. Like, basically, hey, you can take a break and you're not a bad advocate, bad person, bad friend, bad family member. Like, it's okay that this affects you. Like, I feel like that even with journalists, like, they do their job and they report and they go see people when they're not even processing their trauma, like in the height of their trauma. And they're just like, yay, we're fine. And I'm like, no, you're not. You just like read about fires for 3 days and talked to people who dealt with it. Like, give yourself grace and space, you know? And I
We're
think
even
that,
seeing that on the LA TVs. They're showing the journalists who literally like live there, who have lived there, who are worried about their homes miles away reporting.
yeah. What are you supposed to do about that?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and their profession is very similar to ours in what they're taught to do and react. And, you know, they're even more of like a removed observer, right? Because they just report information. We're not reporting information, but they're very impacted by what they do without recognizing it. And I think a lot of us are, because we scroll the same things they're putting out and we think like, ooh, la, 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 scrolling. It's just information. But most of that information really is our news, which is not uplifting. If I was looking at Instagram puppy videos or something all day, like, that might be different. But eventually you're going to get in some kind of algorithm where your friends are going to post about the thing that's happening, because your friends are informed people and you can't turn that off. And it's okay, right? But I think pretending is not the answer, and being honest about it is helpful for all of us to be like, well, gosh, this is affecting me. Cool. Now what?
You're adorable. I like you. I can see why we got along and why I enjoyed your book.
I'm glad you like me.
I do like you. I like you. Can you share with everyone where they can find your book, find you, get more of your uplifting?
With all my uplifting information. Yes. Honestly, though, I will say, like, I love pop culture. I use pop culture references wherever I can. I try to be like, use humor where I can too. It's my favorite defense mechanism. So I don't think like in reading the book, you're going to feel the same that sometimes I feel like people do in lectures, but I use memes in lectures to kind of help with that too. So it's very important to me that there's a emotional balance of the information in what you're taking in. But it's called How Do You Feel? My name's Jessi Gold. You can find it most places that you get books. If you're a local bookstore person, cool. If you're not, those other places have it too. Just, check it out. If you read it and like it, review it, because sometimes people are cranky on there otherwise. If you want to find me, I'm at Dr. Jessi Gold on most platforms. Jessi spelled like Jessica without the CA, because Jessica's my actual name. And I just was like a snooty kid who was like, there's no E in Jessica. So if that helps you remember, That's how you find me. Website's there too. You can contact me through there for speaking or anything like that as well.
You're awesome. Thank you so much.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
My hope for all of you that were listening is that you have learned that we need to have more conversations. We need to take away the stigma around mental health. We need to take away the stigma around medications. We need to help our healthcare professionals, but also help ourselves. Have those conversations. Don't make it weird if somebody is going through something. Talk about it. Be open to talking about it. I think that's how we build our empathy for others. I think that's how we make this world a better place when it is oh so heavy. And every day we do feel like maybe it's gotten worse. And yet Jessi had a great reminder that look back at what it was before. Did it actually get worse, or have we always been right here? So I encourage you to have conversations. Let's talk more about it. Let's get rid of the stigma when it comes to mental health. Do yourself a favor, go out, buy How Do You Feel, give it a read, go follow Dr. Jessi Gold, because you're going to get not only a great education, information, but also some good pop culture references.